Why don't migraine medications work for stress migraines? Often these meds won't touch this type of a migraine because the medication is treating the wrong thing. And it's not a serotonin issue. It's not an inflammation issue. It isn't related to the immune system. It's related to other chemicals that become imbalanced when we go through stress. So I'm going to help you understand the different causes of the stress triggered migraines and what you can do to help each of them. First of all, to determine which one might be at play for you, and then what you can do for them. And I've got a very interesting kind of prodromal weird thing that happens with one of these. It's yawning. And so if you yawn before a migraine hits, there's a very specific neurotransmitter that's involved that is getting too low and is your warning sign. And there's something you can do to prevent that one from happening. So make sure you stick to the end if you're a yawner before your migraine. So my name is Dr. Tanya Paynter. I'm a naturopathic physician and an ex-migraine sufferer. And I have dedicated my career to helping women with chronic migraines understand those biochemical imbalances that are contributing to them and helping them heal from it so that they don't have to deal with the migraines on a regular basis anymore. So a lot of women that I talk to are really frustrated that they know stress is a trigger for them. They do their best that they can. They meditate, they, take long walks, they reduce the stress that they can, and inevitably they still get a stress-related migraine, right? So what if you started to understand the relationship between stress and the chemical changes that happen in your body? If you're able to actually begin to understand which thing is out of balance, then you can actually treat that particular pathway and help to support it with nutrition or with supplements that can help you to gain better control over your migraine. So that's what we're going to talk about. So I want to talk about the three biggest hormones / neurotransmitters that are involved with stress-related migraines, and then give you a little clue as to what you can do to kind of help those types of migraines instead of just writing it out. So the first one is related to cortisol. Now, if you've watched any of my previous videos about stress and stress management, we know that cortisol is a big trigger for migraines. Usually the drop in cortisol. So we usually feel pretty good. Cortisol can help to keep us going and energized, but it's when we have the withdrawal after the stress that we tend to see those migraines happening. So cortisol, if you're not familiar, is it's our awake hormone. It's also a major stress hormone. And so it will spike during stress. And if we have chronic stress for like a week or a month or even a year, it can remain elevated. But at a certain point, your adrenals, which put out cortisol, can no longer keep up with the demand of that prolonged stress. And so then it just kind of starts to fade away. And when the cortisol levels drop, you start getting really tired all the time. You can't wake up in the morning. Maybe sometimes you are fatigued all day long and then you get a burst of energy at night. Those types of things indicate that cortisol is an issue. When it drops, we get triggered, we get a migraine trigger. The thing with cortisol is if you get a migraine first thing in the morning, like you wake up with one, that can be a sign of cortisol, can be also be a sign of other things, but that can be a sign of cortisol. And in the mid-ish afternoon, say 2, 3 o'clock, when our cortisol naturally drops and you get a migraine, then that can also be related to cortisol. So, so those are a couple of kind of red flags for a cortisol related thing. It can also get worse during your the first half of your the week before your period, since progesterone tries to steal precursor hormones from our cortisol. So our cortisol isn't built as well. That can be an indicator. But it can also indicate low progesterone. So some of these, we have to kind of take it as not just any one thing, but a collection of these symptoms. So if you have a lot of fatigue, if you struggle to get up in the morning, if you have a consistent migraine around 2 to 3 in the afternoon, and if you get a migraine after a prolonged, a week or something, and you're go, and you're feeling great, and then everything kind of settles down, and then you get a migraine hit, that can also indicate that cortisol is an issue. So one of the first things that we do to help support imbalanced cortisol release is adrenal supplements. So you might have heard of these before. There's a billion of them out there. So something with ashwagandha, holy basil, rhodiola. What's another couple of good ones? There's actually some that actually contain cortisol. These you have to be really careful with. And I wouldn't recommend doing it without the supervision of a doctor, because cortisol itself can cause the headaches, right? So if you have too much of it, then you can actually trigger your migraine. So you got to be really careful with that. But some of the other kind of balancing herbs can be good options to try and play around with. So that could be something that you can try to help manage your cortisol. Another thing is if you're always high or you're feeling really awake at nighttime and your adrenals are kind of backwards a little bit, there's something called phosphatidylserine that you can take at nighttime to help suppress that cortisol. And then you can take a cortisol boosting supplement like ashwagandha or ginseng or something like that in the morning to kind of help stimulate it, so you turn it around again. Sometimes our adrenals get backwards and it puts too much cortisol out at night and then not enough in the morning, and then you're awake at night and you're sleepy during the day. So that's how we can address or start to address cortisol. Point number 2 is our catecholamines. So these are our stress neurotransmitters. You probably know them as adrenaline, noradrenaline, or epinephrine. Norepinephrine is the technical words for them. So these neurotransmitters they usually climb during the day, especially after stress. So if you tend to notice that in the second half of your workday, you start getting a migraine coming on and you have a fairly stressful job, that's probably going to be related to our catecholamines. So the timing of when you get your migraines is important. So if it's in the second part of your workday, that can indicate catecholamines. If it's during stress, like if you're about to get into a car wreck and you have that adrenaline rush and suddenly a migraine is coming on along with it, absolutely a catecholamine issue. Or conversely, if you have the adrenaline dump, you have your rush, and then as you're settling within 20, 30 minutes of the incident happening, then you get a migraine coming on, also likely related to the catecholamine release. Heat is another trigger. So if you tend to get migraine during a heat wave, or when you're out in heat or you get overheated, that our body gets stressed when we are too hot, and so then we'll release catecholamines. So that's another symptom of a catecholamine related stress migraine. And then again, a link between migraines and anxiety and irritability with family history. So there's some genetic components that means that our body doesn't break down the catecholamines properly. And so if you have a strong family history of those things as well, then likely there's a genetic component that's playing a role with how your body's able to get rid of them. So if it is a genetic thing, there's going to be a lot more that needs to be done to help with that, because we're going to need to make sure that those genes are working properly and that your body is able to break down and process. But diet changes in anybody, whether it's genetic or not genetic, can really help. So this is when a low tyramine diet would be really helpful. So if this picture of, the kind of stress migraine sounds like you might consider trying a low tyramine diet if you haven't already. Now that's just the first step. I'm a huge advocate of not just eliminating. I'm not a big fan of elimination, except for during the healing process. So if you just eliminate the tyramine foods, then other things are going to start triggering you, right? And so then you're going to have to start to restrict more and more. And then we end up getting into that, danger zone of malnutrition. So it's really important that you restrict for a set period of time, maybe over a period of a year, as you're working on helping your body to process the catecholamines more effectively, so that you're not just living on a low tyramine diet forever. Okay. Important note there. All right. And then number 3, and this is the one that is really weird when it comes to yawning. I get that question a lot, like, what does the yawn mean? It's actually a symptom of low dopamine. So dopamine is another one of our stress neurotransmitters. It helps us to feel pleasure and satisfaction and motivation. So it's not just for stress, but it is released in stressful situations. And so this might look like, when you're under high stress and you have to take care of things, like you don't get a migraine for the entire time. Like I mentioned this a little bit earlier with cortisol, but when people say, I feel really good when I'm stressed or like constantly going, I had a client who said that her son had a heart attack and ended up in the hospital for like a week. And so she was with him that whole time, taking care of him and doing the mom thing, right? And she said she felt great, and she was waiting for a migraine to hit every day, and it never came. She had energy, she felt motivated, she felt good. And then she got home and suddenly just, fell off and just was down with a migraine for 4 or 5 days. This is going to be relating to a low dopamine issue, because that dopamine drop afterwards is a well-known migraine trigger as well. A lot of times it will come with yawning beforehand. So if you're prodrome for a migraine, like you start yawning uncontrollably and you know that a migraine is coming on as a result, that's going to be a dopamine issue. And so then helping to support proper dopamine can be helpful. So there's some things you can do nutritionally. You can Google like dopamine supportive foods. But the supplement that is most commonly used to support dopamine is called velvet bean. So this one, you need to talk to your doctor before you start this one, because this is akin to some of the medications they use in Parkinson's and stuff, right? So it's very easy to take too much of it. You need to make sure that you're talking with your doctor that it's appropriate for you. But most people have never heard of velvet bean. It has naturally occurring L-dopa in it, which can directly increase your dopamine levels. And interestingly, I'll just kind of throw this out as a last little tidbit. Dopamine and serotonin they share a common enzyme that helps to process and make both of them. And so when you have that and you have, say, if you're supporting yourself with melatonin and 5-HTP and things to help support your serotonin pathway, your dopamine pathway can actually be inhibited as a result. And so if you've tried those things and it seems like they stimulate, you feel more tired, you feel less motivated, it seems like they cause more migraines, you need to take a look at the dopamine, because then supporting the dopamine pathways can kind of bring things up. Sometimes you need to support both, because then supporting only dopamine can reduce serotonin, which low serotonin levels will also cause migraines. So it might be a balancing act. And again, that's where it's really important to have a doctor on hand to kind of work through some of those with you. If you're on an SSRI that you're keeping the serotonin around longer, that can affect dopamine levels too. So things to kind of consider if you're on something for serotonin, antidepressant medications or supplements, it might be negatively affecting your dopamine pathways. So okay, so those are the 3 main things: dopamine, cortisol, and our catecholamines. So if you want to learn more about what might be causing your migraines and how you can target treatment to your specific needs, and you can check out my website at migrainemastery.org for some free resources and some other training. So until next time.